It started with a ripple, not the kind wind makes, not the kind fish leave behind, something heavier. The farmer had lived beside the lake, small, quiet, unremarkable, the kind of place you stop noticing after a while. But that morning, the water didn't look bright. It moved slowly, like something underneath it was deciding where to come up. At first, he thought it was drift, along shifting beneath the surface, until it changed direction. Logs don't do that. He stepped closer to the edge, boots pressing into soft mud, eyes locked on the water, and then it broke the surface. Not fully, just enough. A shape, dark, rounded, massive, bigger than anything that should exist in a lake that small. He didn't move, didn't breathe, because whatever it was wasn't passing through. It was rising, slow, deliberate, like it had always been there, waiting. And just as quickly, it slipped back under. No splash, no struggle, just gone, leaving the water perfectly still, like it had never been disturbed. That's when he said it, quietly, almost to himself. There's something in that lake. At first, no one believed him, because every town has a story. A shadow in the woods, a sound in the night, something people swear they saw. But this didn't stay a story, because others started seeing it. A fisherman who claimed his line snapped without warning, like it had been pulled by something that didn't even notice the resistance. A boy who saw a rock move near the surface and then disappear. And then came the description. Not a fish, not a log, a shell. And that's when the whispers changed, because now the thing in the lake had a shape. A turtle. But not just any turtle, something massive, something old, something that didn't belong in a place like that. They started calling it Oscar, a name too simple for something that didn't feel simple at all, because the more people talked about it, the stranger it became. It didn't behave like an animal, didn't surface randomly, didn't react the way it should. It appeared when the lake was quiet, when no one expected it, and every time someone got close, it vanished, not fleeing, not panicking, just gone, like it knew exactly when it was being watched, and exactly when to disappear. That's when curiosity turned into something else, because it's one thing to hear about something strange, it's another to realize it's real. And once that happens, people don't leave it alone. At first, it was just a few people watching the lake, a farmer, a fisherman, a couple of curious neighbors. They stood at the edge, staring into water that suddenly felt deeper than it should be, waiting. Because once you know something is there, silence don't feel empty anymore. It feels occupied. Then someone brought a camera, grainy footage, unsteady hands, but for a brief moment, there it was. A dark mass rising just beneath the surface, too large, too smooth. And just like that, everything changed. Because now it wasn't just a story, it was proof. And proof spreads fast. Within days, people started arriving, not dozens, hundreds. Cars lined the roads, families gathered along the banks. Men brought ropes, nets, hooks, not to observe, to capture. Because whatever was in that lake was no longer just a mystery. It was a challenge. And humans don't ignore challenges, they escalate them. Someone shouted from the crowd, "It's a snapping turtle, just a big one." That made it easier to understand, easier to control, because if it had a name, it could be caught. So they made a plan. Hooks were baited, lines dropped deep into the water, heavy chains were brought in, the kind used for things that don't come up easily, and for hours, nothing happened. Just ripples, just tension, just waiting, until suddenly one of the lines went tight. Not a small tug, not a bite, a pull, strong enough to jerk a grown man forward. The crowd surged, shouting, scrambling, "Hold it, don't let it go." But whatever was on the other end wasn't reacting like prey. It didn't thrash, didn't panic, it just pulled, slowly, steadily, like it wasn't trying to escape, like it was deciding whether it even needed to. 3 men grabbed the line, then 5, then more, and for a moment it felt like they had it, like the weight beneath the water was finally rising. But then the line went slack, not snapped, not broken, just released, like whatever held it had simply let go. The hook came back up, bent, twisted, like it had been pressed against something too solid to pierce. The crowd went quiet because something about that moment didn't feel like a failure. It felt like a message. They weren't dealing with something weak, they weren't even dealing with something struggling. They were dealing with something that chose not to come up. And that's when the obsession deepened, because now it wasn't just about seeing it, it was about proving they could take it. More equipment arrived, better tools, stronger lines. People stayed longer, watched harder, and the lake, it stayed calm, too calm, like it was waiting for them to try again. Because the more they pushed, the more it felt like something beneath the surface was doing the same, not in panic, in patience. It didn't stay local, it never does. One piece of footage, one strange account, one thing that doesn't make sense, and suddenly everyone wants to see it for themselves. Within days, the story spread beyond the small farmland roads around Fulk Lake. Newspapers picked it up, then radio, then something bigger. A lake in the middle of nowhere, holding something no one could explain. They gave it a name people won't forget: Oscar. And just like that, the mystery became a spectacle. Cars lined the dirt roads for miles, vendors showed up, cameras rolled constantly. People weren't just visiting anymore, they were gathering, waiting for a moment, a glimpse, a confirmation that the story they had traveled for was real. And for a while, they just got enough to stay. Ripples too large to ignore, dark shapes just beneath the surface, something shifting slowly where nothing should be, but never fully revealing itself, always stopping short of certainty. And that's what kept the crowd hooked. Because once something is almost proven, people don't walk away. They lean in harder. The hunts grew more aggressive. Boats dragged chains across the lake bed. Hooks dropped deeper than before. Men waded into the water despite the risk, and still, nothing. Not a single clear capture. Not a single moment where the thing beneath the lake lost control. It didn't lash out, didn't attack, didn't panic. It simply refused. And that's when the tone changed, because people started noticing something unsettling. The lake wasn't reacting. No fish jumping, no poor birds diving, no disturbance beyond what the people themselves created. It felt contained, like whatever lived there wasn't just part of the lake, it was the reason the lake felt the way it did. One reporter described it best. It's like the water knows something we don't. That line spread almost as fast as the story itself, because deep down, people felt it too. This wasn't a normal hunt. Animals run, animals react, animals make mistakes, but this thing only appeared when it wanted to, moved when it chose, disappeared without explanation, and the longer the crowd stayed, the clearer it became. They weren't closing in on it, they were orbiting it, like everything happening on the surface, the noise, the effort, the obsession, didn't matter at all, because beneath it, something ancient remained exactly where it had always been, untouched, unbothered, unmoved. And slowly, a thought began creeping into conversations, quiet at first, almost uncomfortable to say out loud. What if it doesn't want to be found? Not fear, not yet. Something stranger, respect. Because whatever was in that lake wasn't losing. It wasn't hiding. It was allowing. At first, people tried to stay reasonable. A big, snapping turtle, that's what they said. Something rare, something unusual, but still something explainable, until they started measuring. Not the creature itself. They never had it long enough for that. They measured the effects, the drag on the lines, the depth it moved through, the size of the wake it left behind, and the numbers didn't match reality. One man calculated the pull on a reinforced line, the kind meant for heavy equipment. Whatever was beneath the water wasn't just strong, it was massive, far beyond any snapping turtle ever recorded. And then came the estimates. 30 pounds, impossible. 50, still too small. Some started saying 100, others laughed, until someone did the math properly, based on resistance, based on movement, based on what it took to even shift it slightly. And the number that came back made people go quiet. Hundreds of pounds, not exaggerated, not guessed, calculated. That's when the name started changing. It wasn't just a turtle anymore. It was something else, something older. They began comparing it to the species that shouldn't exist there. Ancient snapping turtles, prehistoric variants, creatures that belonged to a different time entirely, because nothing modern fit the scale. And then someone said it out loud, the thing everyone was starting to think. What if it's been here longer than the lake? That question hit differently, because lakes form, they change, they shift over time, but something that size, something that stable, that doesn't just arrive unnoticed, it stays. And suddenly the story flipped. They weren't trying to catch something that wandered in. They were trying to pull something out that had always been there, something the lake had formed around, something the land had quietly accepted. And then came the most unsettling realization of all. Every time they hooked it, every time the line went tight, every time the weight shifted beneath the water, it never felt like they were lifting it. It felt like it was letting them try, holding just enough tension, giving just enough resistance before deciding no, and releasing itself, not breaking free, choosing to remain. And that's when fear finally crept in. Not loud, not panicked, but quiet. Because if something that large, that old, that unmoved was sitting just beneath the surface, then the real reason wasn't how to catch it. It was, why had it never needed to move? By now, it wasn't just curiosity, it was pressure, Crowds still gathered around Fulk Lake, but the excitement had shifted. People weren't asking if something was in there anymore. They were asking, why haven't we seen it clearly? And when a mystery refuses to reveal itself, humans escalate. So they made a decision not to wait, not to watch, but to force the answer. They were going to drain the lake, not completely at first, just enough to reduce its depth, limit movement, corner whatever was hiding below. Pumps were brought in, water levels began to fall slowly, deliberately, and the entire town watched. Because this was it. No more shadows, no more guesses. Whatever was in that lake would have nowhere left to go. Day by day, the shoreline expanded, mud replaced water, the lake shrank inward, people leaned closer, stared harder, waiting for something massive to emerge, waiting for proof, and at first, nothing happened. No sudden movement, no violent reaction, just water lowering too quietly. That's when something felt wrong, because if something that large was inside, if it had been resisting them this entire time, why wasn't it reacting now? No splashes, no thrashing, nothing. And then one man stepped further into the exposed lake bed, boots sinking into wet mud, eyes scanning the shallow water, searching, and what he found made no sense. There were no massive impressions, no deep grooves, no sign that something enormous had been moving through the lake floor. Nothing that matched the weight they had felt on those lines. It was as if nothing that size had ever been there. But that couldn't be true. Too many people had seen it, too many had felt it, too much had happened. So they kept draining, lower, lower, until the lake was reduced to something small enough that nothing that large could hide. And still, nothing, no shell, no body, no explanation. Just water, mud, silence. The crowd didn't react all at once. There was no single moment of realization. Just a slow shift from excitement to confusion to something far less comfortable, because there were only two possibilities left. Either the entire town had imagined it, or something that large had been there the entire time and left without anyone seeing it go. And that second possibility, it didn't feel like relief, it felt worse, because something that size doesn't just disappear, not without leaving a trace, unless it didn't need to move the way they thought it did, unless it had never been trapped in the lake at all, unless the lake was just where it chose to be seen. For a while, people tried to move on, the crowds faded, the cameras left, the pumps were shut down, and Fulk Lake went back to looking like any other quiet body of water, just smaller, quieter, almost like nothing had ever happened. But that didn't last, because the problem with something like this isn't proving it exists. It's what happens when you can't prove it doesn't. A fisherman, years later, claimed his boat shifted suddenly in still water, no wind, no current, just moved beneath him. Another said he saw something break the surface at dusk, not fully, just enough to disturb the reflection of the sky. Same shape, same slow motion, and then gone, always gone. No one rushed to drain the lake this time, no crowds, no headlines, just quiet reports, the kind that don't spread, but also don't disappear. And that's what makes it worse, because now there's no spectacle to hide behind, no excitement, no noise, just the idea that whatever was there never left, or if it did, it didn't go far. And that brings the story somewhere far more unsettling than before, because back then people believed they were dealing with an animal, something big, something rare, something they could eventually explain. But now the question is different, because something that size, something that controlled its movement that precisely, something that allowed itself to be seen but never captured, doesn't behave like something being hunted. It behaves like something that understands the hunt and chooses when to participate. And that leads to the final thought, the one that never quite leaves once it settles in. What if the lake was never the mystery? What if it was just the stage? Because if something that large could appear, disappear, ignore traps, ignore force, ignore exposure itself, then there's nothing trying it to one place, nothing limiting it, nothing stopping it from being somewhere else entirely. And if that's true, then the story didn't end in a drained lake. It just stopped being visible, and somewhere in a body of water no one is paying attention to, someone just as still, just as patient, just as unmoved, could be resting beneath the surface, not hiding, not trapped, just waiting for the moment it decides to be seen again. And when it does, how will you know it's not the same thing? After Fulk Lake went quiet, people treated it like a closed chapter, a strange event, a local legend, something tied to one place, one time. But that assumption is where the comfort comes from, because if it only happened there, then it can't happen here. And people need that. They need boundaries, limits, locations they can point to and say, that's where it was. But water doesn't work like that. Lakes connect underground, rivers branch and split, depth hides more than distance ever could. And most importantly, you can't see what's beneath the surface. Not really. There are lakes deeper than expected, ponds older than they look, reservoirs that cover things no one remembers anymore, and every single one of them has the same advantage: silence. Because the thing about Oscar, the Beast of Busco, was never just its size, it was control. It appeared when it wanted, it disappeared when it chose, it let people come close just enough, and then it was gone. That's not behavior you expect from something cornered. That's behavior for something that knows it never really is. So now the question isn't about that one lake anymore. It's about every place that shares the same conditions: still water, unseen depth, long stretches of time without disturbance. Because if something like that existed once, something that could remain hidden even when the entire world was watching, then there's nothing stopping it from existing again, or still. And that's when you start noticing things differently: a ripple that doesn't match the wind, a movement that feels too slow, a shape beneath the surface that doesn't break correctly. You watch it longer, trying to explain it, trying to reduce it to something normal. Because that's what people do, until it happens again. And this time, you're not as sure, because the story of one lake is easy to dismiss, but the idea that it wasn't limited to that lake, that's harder. Because now it's not about a place, it's about possibility. And once a possibility exists, it doesn't stay contained, it spreads quietly from one story to another, from one lake to the next, until eventually you're not hearing about it anymore. You're looking for it. At first, it's just water, still, flat, ordinary, the kind of place you have seen 100 times before, a lake, a pond, a reservoir, nothing worth thinking about twice. And that's exactly why it works, because nothing about it demands your attention until something small shifts. A ripple, not from wind, not from anything you can see, just a disturbance. You pause, look a little longer than you normally would, and for a second, you think you see something beneath the surface, a darker shape, too slow to be a fish, too controlled to be random. You tell yourself it's nothing because it has to be nothing. But then it happens again. Not closer, not clearer, just enough to confirm something moved. And now your attention locks in, because once your brain notices a pattern, it refuses to let it go. You start tracking the surface, watching for repetition, looking for confirmation. And here's the part no one prepares you for. The longer you watch, the less water feels like something you're observing, and the more it feels like something that's aware of being observed, not reacting, not approaching, just adjusting subtly. The ripples stop when you focus, return when you relax. The movement shifts just outside your direct line of sight, and suddenly you're not watching randomly anymore. You're waiting for it to happen again, waiting for it to reveal just a little more. And in that moment, you understand something that completely changes the story. Back at Fulk Lake, people thought they were searching for it, but they weren't. They were being allowed to keep looking, because something that can stay hidden that long, something that can avoid capture even when an entire town tries to force it into the open, isn't just hiding, it's deciding when to appear, when to disappear, when to let you think you almost saw it. And now, standing here, watching water that suddenly doesn't feel as empty as it should, you're part of that same moment, not in the past, not in a story, right now. And the final realization settles in quietly. You don't need proof, you don't need a clear sighting, because the uncertainty is enough, the possibility is enough. And once that possibility exists, every body of water changes, every lake feels deeper, every ripple feels intentional, every silence feels occupied. And maybe that's the real reason nothing was ever found. Not because it wasn't there, but because finding it was never the point. The point was this moment. The moment where you stop looking at the surface and start wondering what's looking back.